Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. Hey, Patricia.
Hey, Greg.
Well, Jason Carter is the former Democratic nominee for governor in 2014, grandson of President Jimmy Carter, and one of the party's most recognizable voices. More than a decade after his race against Governor Nathan Deal, Carter is back in the political arena in some forms, opting against his own run for governor, but instead backing Jason Esteves for the gubernatorial seat. Since Carter last ran, Democrats won presidential race here in Georgia, captured U.S. Senate seats, and became increasingly competitive statewide. But they still haven't won the governor's mansion since 1998. And Republicans continue to hold firm control of the state legislature. So we're going to ask Jason what's changed since his 2014 campaign, whether Democrats are positioned to break through down ballot, and what message can resonate beyond Metro Atlanta, and why he believes Jason Esteves is the right standard bearer for the next chapter of Georgia Democratic politics. Thanks, Jason Carter, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Start right into it. You ran for governor in 2014, of course. When you compare Georgia then to Georgia now, what's changed the most politically?
You know, I think several things, right? I think Georgia has been for the last several decades, sort of consumed or by the tidal waves that move national politics, right? And those have changed so much that, when I ran in 2014, you had different races up and down the ballot, but pretty much people voted Democrat or Republican, right? Where there was a Senate race with Michelle Nunn, but those races were all within a half a point. I think that what you've seen, even as you mentioned, when Joe Biden won Georgia the first time, and then even when Donald Trump won, Donald Trump got 0.7% of the vote. So this is a very thin margin on either side. We've obviously got two Democratic senators, and it's a state that is truly, I think, up in the air.
Let's talk a little bit about the governor's race, because we do have this incredibly crowded Georgia primary for Democrats and for Republicans. To me, that speaks to the fact that both parties feel it is so incredibly winnable. You've endorsed Jason Esteves in the race. Tell us why you did that. He is not breaking out in the polls so far. How do you explain that? And you were just out early voting for him today.
Sure. So here's the thing. I think when you look at the Republican race for governor, what you see is a state that is very thinly, balanced. And I think Republicans, because of what's sort of the instability that's coming out of Washington, I think Republicans are trying to figure out who they are. And I think that instability out of Washington is also doing the same thing for Democrats. And I think it really has. And so you've got a group of people on both sides where I think the door is wide open. I think when I look at Jason, I've known him for 20 years. There's things about politics that you can change, and there's things you can't change. Who Jason is not going to change. He is a father of children in our public school system. He is the husband of someone who's, in our healthcare system. He is a small business owner. He's done those things. And I think those sort of immutable characteristics are the kind of thing in a moment of instability and chaos that people can sort of get behind. And I think what you have seen in the polls is Jason moving more than others. I think you're going to see a runoff in both gubernatorial races. And I think, that runoff is where we're really going to have a battle. I think the Republican side is super interesting as well.
Yeah, I want to get to the Republican side in a second, but are the Democrats, are they talking about the right issues? Are they talking about the affordability, the opposition to Donald Trump, the issues that a lot of primary voters want to hear?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the big problem, and I was just in Gilmer County last week, and you're talking about diesel at $5.75 a gallon. This Donald Trump got elected to the extent he had any mandate at all, it was to control costs. And that has gone out the window. It's gone out the window in a host of ways and up and down the political and economic spectrum, right? Everything is more expensive. My wife goes to Durham every 3 weeks to get treatment. And, the plane tickets have gotten now twice as expensive as they were, when we first started. And so it's a real issue that people confront in their lives. And when you talk about affordability, you talk about healthcare, you talk about small businesses, I think that's what I hear Democrats talking about. And yes, there is this innate sort of cultural battle about how much people are discouraged by Donald Trump's personality. And I do think that gets your biggest cheers at Democratic rallies. But I also think that's a swing issue. I mean, I think there's a lot of people in the middle who are thinking like, does this feel like a Christian country right now? Not to me, and not to a lot of people that I think are swing voters.
And talk about the Republican field. Obviously, Rick Jackson, the billionaire who got in late in the game, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Brad Raffensperger, Chris Carr, all of these people now well known. What makes that race so interesting to you besides the obvious that there's just so much money being thrown around? And what do you think it means for Democrats to be going up against one of these people?
Well, I think it just demonstrates how uncomfortable the Republican Party is right now, my view. I was listening to the Braves game on the radio yesterday. Rick Jackson has a radio ad that is essentially an ad about people watching his TV ads, right? I mean, it's sort of meta in all of that. But what that really goes to show is that what Rick Jackson has done for the state of Georgia, so far as we all know, is run ads, right? I mean, and when you're leading candidates running campaign ads about his campaign ads, that's not a lot of like substance and record. And you've got these other three guys, Lieutenant Governor, long record, you know where he stands, Attorney General, long record, you know where he stands, Secretary of State, demonstrated who he is repeatedly. It's interesting to me that those guys who are real leaders can't sort of capture the moment. And some of that is everybody hates a politician, and I get that. But it's just really interesting to see that the leadership of the Republican Party is getting lambasted on some level by someone who's really come out of nowhere.
Back when you ran, I think the entire race was maybe $20-30 million.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's already been spent in like the first few weeks of the Republican primary alone. Do Democrats risk kind of being dwarfed, being overshadowed by all the ad spending on the Republican side?
I think maybe, but I think the biggest question, again, the thing that's going to come like a wave no matter what, is you're going to have Donald Trump dominate the headlines on this election. Yes, we all need to run our races. But, and yes, it's different. When I ran, to your point, we probably spent, I think I raised and spent $10 or $11, $12 million total.
That was huge back then.
Huge. It was a bit more than a Challenger had ever raised and spent. And, here we are a decade later, and people are going to spend 50, 60, 70. We spent $100 million on the governor's race last time. And maybe 200 in the Senate races. I mean, you're talking about huge amounts of money. The question is, what difference does that make? Because I still think the political oxygen is going to be defined by what's happening in and around Washington. And I think that's going to end up being good for Democrats. And I think people are going to know at the top of the ticket, this governor, what you've got is tens of millions of dollars in the Republican primary being spent tying everybody as closely as they can to a very unpopular president. And so then they're going to have to undo that with a bunch of money as they go after the folks that are going to decide this election.
So he is right now, according to polls, a very unpopular president, even in Georgia. Yet he also just won Georgia. He just won it again. I think a lot of it had to do with who he was running against. He, in some ways, won it, but in other ways, Democrats lost it. What should Democrats be doing right now, knowing that Trump's numbers are going to be up and down? We don't know if Iran will resolve quickly. We don't know if there will be another assassination attempt and, things really spiral out of control very quickly with this president. What did Democrats do wrong in 24 that they cannot repeat in 26?
That's a complicated question, obviously, but I think the key right now in 2024, I think you're right. I think that the Democrats obviously had a very different candidate selection process, right? I mean, remember, that was a real crisis for Democrats when Biden decided not to run. There was no primary. It was a very weird situation where people end up with this candidate who by the way, I liked, and I like her personally, and I think she's a good candidate. And again, Donald Trump got 50.7% of the vote. So it's not like he steamrolled in Georgia. You had a very complicated moment. And so I think that if you read too much into that, you can cause real problems for yourself as Democrats. And I think what we need to do is focus on the issues that matter. We know there's a lot of volatility in Washington, to your point, up, down, who knows. But that volatility in Washington has to be dealt with on the Democratic side in a governor's race by saying, hey, There's a lot of volatility in Washington. Whether you voted for Donald Trump last time or not, this is not what you wanted. And what we're going to do in Georgia is maintain a level of understanding for what you're going through on the ground: affordability, small businesses, education, healthcare. These are the kitchen table issues that people, I think, have always been talking about.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that, because you just talked about going up to one of my favorite counties, Gilmer County, LJ area. What mistakes do Democrats make when they try to appeal to either moderate or even conservative-leaning voters who might otherwise be amenable to Democratic message, if not for either focus on culture war issues or sometimes even focus on opposition to Trump?
I think a lot of Democrats have spent a lot of time deciding that there's certain voters they don't want. And I think that's a problem, right? When your party is based in large part on inclusion, it's interesting that there's a group of people that you don't include. And I think that one of the biggest things that I see out there, I mentioned it earlier a little bit, but I think, my grandfather, my family is so fundamentally lives their life in a religiously integrated way, right? Like my grandfather was a devout Christian. And when we reach out as Democrats to people in that community has really been abandoned. And it hasn't necessarily been abandoned by the lip service that's given within the Republican primary to some extent, but the way that the president acts, the way that people then fall in line behind some of these actions, I think that has left a group of people out there that are very, very deeply uncomfortable with sitting in that Republican Party. And I think a lot of the cultural issues that were defining that Christian right debate have been taken off the table in certain ways over the last several years. And I think that people are ready to start talking about what do we do in these communities for people who need something. And it's not about building a bunch of welfare. It's not about that. It's about actually making a difference in people's lives. I think people are ready to hear about that. And I think Democrats do themselves a disservice when they don't do that. Warnock, by the way, of course, is great at that.
Do you think the Democrats have the muscle memory, or are they going to need to relearn? We have a whole new generation of people on the ballot. Do they need to learn how to speak to religious communities? I'd love to know how you think that would work.
I think maybe. I mean, I think at the same time, one of the things that is fundamentally true is that sometimes when political analysts talk about religious voters, they think about white people. And the bottom line is, like, the backbone of the Democratic Party is church-going African Americans. And that's true. And when we talk as Democrats about multiracial coalitions, we recognize, or need to recognize, that when you talk about the Latino community in Georgia, when you talk about the Black community in Georgia, you're talking about a very overtly religious community, at least in part, right? The same as white people are, at least in part. And so I think we have that muscle memory in a lot of ways. I think, again, Raphael Warnock is a really, really good example of somebody who does that. And I frankly think John Ossoff talks about morals in the way that I think people want to hear, right? We don't hear that discussion out of Washington right now. Is this something we should do, or is this something we can do? And it seems like the strength for strength's sake that is defining the Trump administration is something that's leaving a lot of people who care about morality, who care about, is this something that not only can I do, but should I do? And I just think Democrats have that muscle memory. They just have to be willing to open their minds a little bit to who it is that they're talking to.
Where do you see your own politics going, your own political career? Because we hear from Democrats who say, we want Jason Carter on the field in the future, but you're still really involved. You can tell you're involved with candidates, you're involved with the party. What role does politics play in your life right now? Politics plays a role in my life similar to it does in everyone who listens to this program, right? I care about it because I know that it matters. And I also care about it because I know that it's broken right now to me, right? And every once in a while, someone will say, when are you getting back into politics? And depending upon who they are, I say, when you look out at our politics, does that seem like something you want to be involved in? And uniformly, they laugh and they go, oh, no, fair enough. But no, I think it's really important. I think it matters in the world. And I also think everybody likes the
backup quarterback, right? Like I feel like I'm not on the field, so everyone's like, well, he would be better. And as soon as you get out there in politics, you're right. I'm deprogrammed. I'm not. I get to say what I want to say. As soon as you get into politics for real, you have to start taking positions on issues, and then you make enemies and
the DJ
whatever.
Shockley effect.
Yes, exactly. Although that guy turned out to be great.
Turned out great.
Love DJ Shockley. But yeah, the point is you got to figure it out. So I appreciate that people talk about me still. I'm 50, so I'm not totally out of it. I mean, if given the last several presidents, I've got 30 more years or so before I'm really out of politics. But I'm focused on it in the way that matters to me. Obviously, I have things going on in my life. The Carter Center is another thing that I do that's nonpartisan, cross-partisan. We do
You're
with
the chairman of the board.
I'm the chairman of the Carter Center board, but this is a moment where our politics requires a lot of nonpartisan work. A lot of things where we have to come back and say, yes, this is polarized. But when I sit down with Burt Jones or Brad Raffensperger or Chris Carr, I don't know Rick Jackson, but if I sat down with Rick Jackson, there are things we agree on, right? And that's another aspect of how I interact with politics that I think is really, really important. And so I'm engaging, I'm doing what I can. The partisan side, I think matters. The nonpartisan side, I think matters too.
Jason Carter, thanks for joining us.
All right.
Well, just ahead, he once challenged Marjorie Taylor Greene as a traditional conservative. Now he's running as a staunch Trump ally. Dr. John Cowan joins us to discuss his political evolution and his race for the 11th District of Georgia. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. I'm Greg Bluestein. A reminder, if you have a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, leave a question, and we'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 770-810-5297. We cannot wait to hear from you. Now we're joined by Dr. John Cowan, one of the most closely watched candidates in Georgia's crowded race for the 11th congressional district. It's an open seat contest in a reliably Republican district that stretches across parts of Northwest Georgia all the way to Atlanta suburbs and has become a test of where the GOP stands in the Donald Trump era. Dr. Cowan is no stranger to Georgia politics. He's a neurosurgeon who previously ran for Congress in Northwest Georgia in 2020 when he lost a runoff to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Back then, he cast himself as a more traditional conservative alternative. Since then, the party has continued to change, and Donald Trump's grip on Republican voters has only strengthened, and Cowan is now running as an outspoken Trump ally in a new district. So today, we'll talk about political evolution, loyalty tests inside the GOP, healthcare and science in an age of skepticism, and why he believes voters in the 11th district should send him to Washington. Dr. Cowan, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
So first off, why run for Congress in a new district after losing in 2020? And what did that race back then, 6 years ago, though it seems like an eternity, what did that race teach you?
Well, listen, that race taught me that we need people who are workhorses in Congress, not show horses. And I think we've seen over the last 6 years that Congress has become invaded by social media influencers, people who are up there to get famous or just get a paycheck. And I think the people in the District 11 want to send somebody to Congress who's willing to do the hard work, willing to stand up for their interest, understands the subject matter, so healthcare, energy, education, someone who has deep roots in the district. My family's been in Bartow County for 100 years, and we've been servant leaders. There's a long history of my family giving back to the community, working hard in the community, and trying to make it a more perfect union. And that's what I want to bring to the House of Representatives.
You mentioned there's the Congress with social media influencers and the like. Would you consider Marjorie Taylor Greene, even though this is not her district, would you consider her one of those negative influences in Congress?
Well, I think she went up there and she was just throwing grenades left and right. And when you've got to deal with 434 other individuals who come from their own districts and think they're the next greatest thing, you've got to reach out and meet people where they are and try to compel them to your side. And in my experience with patients, with my wife, with my my children, is that throwing grenades at people, certainly when you first meet them, is not the best way to do it. I actually am tougher with people I like than with people I don't know. And I think she did the opposite. She did not want to try to make her own team better through the tensions that we need to have in shaping policy, but she immediately attacked the other side. Well, look, we all disagree with the other side. We don't necessarily even need to highlight that. What we've got to do as Republicans is work hard amongst ourselves to shape our message and find compelling reasons to bring people from the other side to the side of the Republican cause.
I read about this the other day, but this race is also something of a test of past views on President Trump. You and one of your opponents in the primary, Public Service Commissioner Tricia Pridemore, have both criticized President Trump in the past. You in 2020 and after 2020, issuing different criticisms on social media and on the campaign trail. Now you're a supporter of him and his MAGA agenda. What changed?
Well, nothing's changed, Greg. I mean, this is exactly what good teammates do. I grew up playing football from Pop Warner up to college football at Davidson. And we always learned that your toughest scrimmages and your toughest practices should be on the practice field. I played center. And so I got to, be second fiddle to the quarterback. And, Donald Trump's our quarterback. But that didn't mean that when I snapped the ball and I saw the quarterback do something wrong, I didn't call him out. I want him to be the best quarterback he can be. And the other thing is our coaches used to tell us, John, and they called me Johnny then, but Johnny, when I stop yelling at you, that's when you need to worry. And when I stop, trying to make you sharpen you either through my words, actions, and deeds, that's when you need to worry. And that's how I view the Republican Party should be. We should have our brawls behind the scenes, and we should go at each other and sharpen each other to make us the best we can be. And that's what I'm going to do in Congress and with the administration. I want us to be the best we can be. And if we have to elbow each other every once in a while, that's okay. I think President Trump is kind of a Brooklyn brawler. He likes that. And should we do that out in public? Maybe not, but that's going to make us, when we get on that playing field against the Democrats, we will have seen it all, done it all. I will snap the ball, the quarterback will run the play, and we're going to score a touchdown.
So what do you think the party has gotten right over the last 6 years since you last ran? And what do you think it's gotten wrong?
Listen, I think the party reaches out to ordinary Americans, hardworking Americans who want lower taxes. They want less government. They want secure borders. And President Trump really, that is his agenda. And again, we all know it's very difficult to do. We have this huge battleship of a country that has been led in the wrong path, certainly over the Biden administration, but really over the last 50 years. So many proverbial cans have been kicked down the road by previous administrations that Trump is really tackling. He's uniquely positioned to say, we're not going to let Iran terrorize the world anymore. We're not going to let corporate interest steal from the middle class. We're not going to let the Democrats tax us into oblivion. And he continues to work on the spending in Congress. He's trying to root out corruption, and I applaud him for it. He is a unique individual. He's a once-in-a-generation type leader, and I'm going to give him my full support and try to make him the best president he can be and give him the legacy he deserves.
Agriculture is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, industry in the 11th district. Do you support the president's tariffs that are helping some farmers but hurting others?
Yeah, look, we've talked a lot about tariffs on the campaign trail, and I've talked to constituents and people in the district, and sometimes there's winners and losers on the tariff side. The key is we have to have not only free trade but fair trade, and so free trade is impacted a little bit by tariffs, but the tariffs help get us back to fair trade. And one of the problems is we have a lot of partners, we have a lot of adversaries around the world who deflate their currency or flood the market. And we have to use tariffs as a tool to do that. Now, do farmers, can there be some losers on that side? There can be, but I think in the long road, President Trump's not thinking about the next election. He's thinking about the next generation. And that's the way I want to lead too. Sometimes we have to tighten our belts and do some hard things, but for the cattlemen of our district, the poultry workers and agriculture people, I will always have their back. I'm going to look out for their interests. One of the ways we can help them is by lowering their costs, their fuel costs, their insurance costs, their property taxes, things like that. I think that's where we can bend the cost curve. We have a huge market in the United States, and we need to make sure we're expanding that, and but then also make sure that our farmers and people in agriculture can export their goods too.
There are some in your party who worry that Congress is becoming something of a rubber stamp for President Trump's agenda. Do you think Congress should assert more of its independence?
Well, listen, we have a system of checks and balances. Our Constitution is, we have three. I often say we have four branches of government. We've got the legislative, judiciary, and the executive, as well as the states. And I think all four of these entities have to do their part. I think Congress has gotten away from regular order, and I think that's the biggest problem. Not that they're, not asserting power against Trump, but the mechanism that has been designed there for the last 200 years or so is not being allowed to play out. Too much power gets consolidated in the speaker. The committees have been neutered from some of their power. They've not been able to really debate specific items of the budget. Too much of our budget gets lumped into one omnibus bill that small majorities are able to pass. And I think all Congress people in Congress should sign on to a balanced budget and say, listen, we may not agree on everything in here, but this budget is not going to bankrupt our children and our grandchildren. And that's the role of Congress. That's where we've fallen short.
You support the way that President Trump has prosecuted the war against Iran. And where do you see this conflict ending?
Yeah, listen, it's going to end when we have a free Iran. I'm fully convinced of that. I know too many people whose families have fled that regime, who've been tortured and murdered by that regime. We have seen what's happened if we let an autocratic theocracy wreak havoc throughout the Middle East. And if you look at the prime player of most terrorist activities throughout the Middle East, it all points back to Iran. And we have an opportunity now. I think there are people on the ground there who want to breathe that freedom. I'm going to support President Trump doing whatever he can to make sure we get rid of this terroristic regime that's there. We need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and this needs to be one of our great allies going forward. It can be again. They have been an ally in the past. There's a very educated population there who's literally just been held hostage by this theocracy that's been terrorizing their own people and the rest of the world. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to change that for the good.
There are 4 Republican-held open U.S. House seats in Georgia. You're running in the only one where President Trump, has not endorsed a favored candidate yet. Have you been aggressively seeking that endorsement? I'm assuming you have. And if so, what's your pitch to the president?
Well, listen, I've been aggressively going out and getting every vote that I possibly can get because the voters of this district are the people who will put me in Congress, and that's who I'm ultimately going to be responsible for. So that is my first and foremost priority. President Trump is a very influential person in our party. I want him to see me as an ally, someone who will make him better, someone who will work with him, and someone who can compel Democrats to our side. And so that's the message I've been trying to portray. Look, I'm a political outsider just like he was. I'm a businessman. I mean, not to the extent he was, but, I've got my ice cream company and I've got my fireplace company and I've had a sporting event company and I had a toy company. I mean,
you had an ice cream company?
Yes. And I've done a lot of entrepreneurship and I give back in my small way. I'm not a billionaire like he is,
not yet.
but so I think there actually are a lot of similarities in the way I'm coming to this office as to the way Trump did. Obviously, I'm going to come at it more, in my own sort of way. But I think at the end of the day, when he sees what I have to offer the people, he's going to see the overwhelming support I get in this primary, that I think he's going to say, listen, I have my disagreements with a lot of people, but Dr. Cowan is who we need.
So when last you ran, we talked about you running against Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2020. COVID was, of course, raging, and the dominant topic of debate for congressional candidates and really every candidate running for public office. What did the COVID era teach you about politics and science? Because I know it was front and center in your campaign.
Well, this COVID era, again, was generationally unique. I mean, we've not had a pandemic like that in 100 years. We also combine that with this rise of social media. We had a lot of people staying at home. They were online. We had this conspiratorial fervor that I think even most people look back at and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I believed some of this stuff. And there was just a lot of distrust. There was a lot of concern. I mean, again, nobody had experienced a pandemic where we didn't know, was this thing going to kill 3 people or was it going to kill 30 million people? We legitimately didn't know it. A lot of mistakes were made because we were wandering in unknown territory. President Trump should be commended for the way he helped end the COVID scourge, not only through, public health initiatives, but Operation Warp Speed. I mean, that is a moon landing effort he did in 8 months that took, 10 years or takes 20 years to do. And so I think over time, as some of the dust settles from that time period, we're going to see that we had some great leadership then. Politics, became a little too conspiratorial. The internet influenced things a little too much. I do think it showed a highlight that the loudest voices were not always the ones that we needed to listen to, and I think that's proved itself. And so I think in this election and ones going forward, people are going to look more towards serious individuals who want to lead through constitutional principles and who are, like I said, are going to be workhorses and not show horses.
I remember bumping into you at one of the Republican rallies up in Northwest Georgia shortly after you lost your race, and you were administering vaccines to folks up in that district doing your job. But I remember it was kind of a rally at a tent outside, and you were concerned because not a single person at the rally had signed up for a coronavirus vaccine while you were there. Are you worried about the vaccine skepticism that has seeped into at least some levels of Republican politics?
Listen, like any good evangelist for their cause, you put yourself out there and you go to places where people may not agree with you, and you try to show them a better way, and you try to instill confidence that, from the best of my medical knowledge and the way I was trained, that this was going to be safe for you to do. And any small way I can help save lives, I'm going to do it. Governor Kemp was actually with me at that event. And I think we stood, this is where leaders stand up and they say, listen, I know you're scared. I know you've heard things about this that may make you hesitant, but, I want to earn your trust and your respect. And so I think the medical community has a long way to go. We certainly have our stains in the past, but, listen, I've done this for 25, 30 years now. I genuinely want to help people. And I would say the vast majority of physicians, they are there to serve and to help. And I'm going to take that same ethos to Congress. And sometimes that means doing things that people don't agree with or trying to allay fears that you have. I make life and death decisions every day where people are like, Dr. Cowan, I've got this brain tumor. I don't know what to do. Should I go try this and this? And I say, I'm catching you at your most vulnerable. You are scared. You're willing to try anything. You're willing to listen to any voice. And I need to be that voice of reason. And sometimes I have to tell you, man, there's nothing more we can do. And that's hard, right? But then I can say, listen, here's where we can fight. Here's where I can make your quality of life good. And so I want to take that same philosophy to Congress and serve in that way.
Dr. John Cowan, Republican candidate for 11th District of Georgia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Well, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoyed what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It really helps others find our show and connect with our conversation. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.